Once you have an object modeled, it comes time to start adding color and surface quality to that model. These are called materials, and they're really kind of like painting your model. So, for example, if we modeled something in Maya, it'd be almost like sculpting it in clay, but we'd then paint it in order to give it more of a realistic look. So in Maya, we use materials along with textures to give the surface its look. So let's first of all talk about materials. And those really are just the way that a surface shades. So here I have 5 spheres, and each of them has a different shading model. Now, before we get into any of this, let me talk a little bit about Maya and rendering. We're going to get deeper into rendering a little bit later, but let's just give you a quick brief overview of how to render. So first thing you want to know is that we have a rendering menu set, and under that we have a lot of options here, and one is called render current frame. So if I do that, it'll just go ahead and render the frame that I have. Now, if you notice in this, we actually have a number of different renderers. So the default render is called the Maya software renderer. We also have what's called the Mental Ray renderer. These are the 2 most popular renderers. Then there's also what's called a hardware and a vector renderer, and these are a little bit more custom. They're more for particle effects or other types of special effects. So in the Maya software renderer, we can just hit this button and it will render. We can also switch over to Mental Ray, and it will render as well. Now notice a little bit of a difference here because by default Mental Ray actually turns on ray tracing, which is what is giving us these reflections. Now another way to adjust the renderer is to go into the render settings window, which is under here, rendering editors, render settings, and that brings up the settings. Actually, this is where I usually render from. So if I click here, this will render the current frame, and this here will bring up render settings. Now let's take a look at this render settings window. And the most important one is to decide which renderer to use, the Maya software renderer or the Mental Ray renderer. Each one has its advantages. Typically, once you get into professional production, you'll probably be using Mental Ray most of the time. But the Maya software renderer has some advantages, and one is that it's a little bit faster. It's actually, in some ways, a little bit easier to control, but it's not nearly as robust as Mental Ray. Now, this window has different tabs depending upon what type of renderer you have. So the common tab basically just determines how big the image is, image size, as well as some other stuff such as what image format you want to render in and whether or not you're actually going to be saving to a file. But we'll get to that as we actually get into rendering. So when we turn on Mental Ray, you'll notice a number of different tabs show up. One is for render passes, one is turn on different types of rendering features. The next one is for quality, how much quality you want, and then some other indirect lighting. This is for more realistic lighting and other additional options. We're not going to get too deep into this right now. I think right now the most important thing is that you know that there's 2 different renderers and we need to switch between them from time to time. Now typically I'm going to be using the Maya software renderer, but there will be times where I'll be doing Mental Ray specific stuff and then we'll have to change our renderer.